Welcome to The Explainer. We often think of the Middle Ages as this time of constant black and white conflict, right? Christians versus Muslims. But what if I told you a few lines of poetry could totally flip that idea on its head? Today, we're going to unpack a tiny piece of text that challenges some really big and honestly kind of lazy ideas about history.
All right, so let's just dive right in. Let's look at the words themselves, which have survived for, get this, over 1,000 years.
Okay, so listen to this. These are the actual words from a medieval Christian poet, and he's talking about someone, but who? Well, the them he's talking about with this incredible love is none other than Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, and his entire family. Wow. Yeah, exactly. A Christian poet praising a major figure in Islam in the Middle Ages? I mean, how is that even possible? It seems to go against everything we think we know about this era. It feels totally wrong. So, what's going on here? Let's dig into this mystery. Okay, so the first piece of the puzzle is understanding that this poem went on an absolutely incredible journey. We're talking across centuries and literally across a continent. So check this out. It all starts in the 8th century with a Christian poet named Zabanina, way over in what we now call Iraq. But the reason we even know about it is because 300 years later and 4,000 kilometers away in Spain, a Muslim scholar named Ibn Abd al-Barr decided to include it in his book. Think about that journey. That journey alone tells us something so important. It shows that ideas, stories, poems, they were constantly on the move. It wasn't a world of isolated castles. It was more like a massive social network, all speaking Arabic, stretching from Baghdad all the way to Cordoba in Spain. This world was having a conversation with itself. And here's the really crucial part. The poem didn't just travel from one place to another, its meaning changed along the way. It meant something completely different to the Christian guy who wrote it in Iraq than it did to the Muslim scholar who preserved it in Spain. Let's go back to the poet, Zabina, in 8th century Mesopotamia. For him, this probably wasn't some fuzzy, feel-good poem about interfaith harmony. No way. Christians back then were right in the thick of local politics. So praising Ali and his supporters, who would later be known as the Shia, was a really smart political move. It was basically picking a side, aligning with one powerful group against the rulers of the day, the Umayyads. This was a political statement, loud and clear. But here's where it gets really interesting. It's how the poet says it. He uses this one specific phrase that is just packed with meaning. It's way more clever than just saying, hey, I don't care what people think. See, this phrase, the reproacher's reproach, it comes straight out of the Quran. And in the Quran, it's used to describe this special group of really good people, people loved by God, who stick to their beliefs even when misguided folks criticize them. So by using this line, the Christian poet is doing something absolutely brilliant. He's basically saying, yeah, you might criticize me for loving Ali, but guess what? I'm just like those righteous people you read about in your own holy book. He's using Islamic scripture to justify his own position. I mean, that's an incredibly savvy and deep move. Okay, now let's fast forward 300 years to Spain. The world of the scholar Ibn Abd al-Barr is completely different. He's a Sunni, not a Shia, and where he lived, Shiism was kind of looked at with suspicion. Plus, his world was all about these complicated, shifting alliances between Muslim and Christian kings. So for him, this poem wasn't about taking a side in an old political fight. Nope. For him, it was a perfect conversation starter. It was a way to get his fellow scholars thinking and debating about a really hot topic. Can you, and should you, be friends with people from other religions? So when you step back and look at it, this one little poem teaches us some huge things. 3 big ideas, really, that totally challenge how we usually think about the pre-modern world. First off, this was a deeply connected world. I mean, the fact that a poem could travel all the way from Iraq to Spain proves it. There was this massive, ongoing conversation happening in Arabic that stretched all across the Mediterranean. People were reading each other, quoting each other, and arguing with each other over thousands of kilometers. Second, it just shatters the idea that identities were simple. We love to think of Christian and Muslim as these two separate, opposing teams wearing different jerseys. But this poem shows us the boundaries were way, way fuzzier. You could absolutely be a Christian and also be a passionate political supporter of a Muslim cause. Things just didn't line up in neat little boxes. And third, it shows us that literature, especially poetry, was serious business back then. It wasn't just entertainment. For scholars like Ibn Abd al-Barr, poems and stories were powerful tools. They were the battleground where you debated the biggest questions of the day, like, what does it mean to be a good person in a world full of different people and different beliefs?
All right, so after all that, what's the big takeaway from this little centuries-old poem?
Well, this tiny poem is like a key. It unlocks a much richer, more complicated view of the past. It helps us see it wasn't just about constant conflict. It was a world of connection, of messy politics, of deep and thoughtful debate. Honestly, a world that looks a lot more like our own than we might think.
And really, it's just a powerful reminder that history is packed with surprises. This one poem survived for 1,000 years. It just makes you wonder, right? What other incredible stories are out there, hidden away in old books, just waiting to completely change what we think we know about the past?